So, good evening, everyone. I welcome everyone on behalf of lecture series on constitutionalism to all of you who are present, who have taken out their time on a public holiday. We have Professor Rajeev Bhargava as the keynote speaker as part of the lecture series. We could not have any better speaker than Professor Bhargava himself to be the keynote speaker. The topics that he will be covering for 4 days sums up the larger theme that this lecture series has been covering spanning over the last 2 years. If he may allow to introduce himself. So, societies since 2005 and is currently the Honorary Fellow and Director of Parekh Institute of Indian Thought. He has been a professor at the Center for Political Studies, JNU, between 1980 to 2005 and between 2001 and 2005. And he was the head Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. Professor Bhargava did his BA in economics from the University of Delhi and MPhil and DPhil from Oxford University. He has been a fellow at Harvard University, University of Bristol, Institute of Advanced Studies, Jerusalem, Berlin, and the Institute for Human Sciences, Vienna. He has also been distinguished resident scholar, Institute for Religion, Culture, and Public Life. He has also been the Asia Chair at Sciences, Paris. He is honorary fellow at the Balliol College, Oxford, and currently a professorial fellow at the Institute of Social Justice, ACU, Sydney. Professor Bhargava publication includes Individualism in Social Sciences, What is Political Theory and Why Do We Need It, and The Promise of India's Secular Democracy. His edited works are Secularism and Its Critics and Politics and Ethics of the Indian Constitution. Professor Bhargava is on the advisory board of several national and international institutions and was a consultant for the UNDP report on cultural liberty. His recent works include Between Hope and Despair, Politics and Ethics of the Indian Constitution, and Reimagining Indian Secularism. Today, Professor Bhargava will be speaking on the topic, What is Theory and Why Do We Need It? Without further ado, I request Professor Bhargava to start the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayush, and I'm grateful to all of you for extending an invitation to me to come and deliver these lectures. It's nice to be back. I was here last year, I think, so I'm very pleased that you fulfilled your promise to get me here, and I've fulfilled my promise to actually come to return here. Just a couple of, thanks for the very generous introduction, Ayush, but just a couple of corrections. One is that the institute of which I was a fellow in Sydney, that institute has been shut down. And the reason why it was shut down is because the conservative government in Australia felt that this institute was spending too much time on other civilizations, on other religions, and on marginalized sections. And so they decided to withdraw funding, and it was shut down. And we were invited professorial fellows there from about 12 of us from different parts of the world, and we had hoped that we will have a nice retired life, but that was very brutally cut short by this idea that this Catholic university should focus only on a certain kind of religion and on Western civilization and not on other civilizations. So there's a kind of parochialism that prevented me from continuing there. And the second is that I've withdrawn from most of the national and international advisory boards, of which I was a member. I don't remember if I'm, maybe there are a couple still, but okay. So, yeah. So let me, is that okay? Okay, now it's clear? Right, I didn't say anything very interesting, so you haven't missed much. So I believe I have about 45 minutes. And so normally I take about 2.5 hours to talk about this subject. So I'll cut it short. And the why why do we need theory is something that I'll leave for the discussion. And I'll focus on, what is theory? And this is, of course, a theory of human beings. I'm not talking about scientific, pure sciences, a theory of physics or theory of chemical theories or thank you. This is theories that pertain to human beings. So political, social, legal, cultural. I'm really talking about theories which of the human sciences. Now, briefly, I would ask you to think of theory as a form of systematic reflection on human affairs, with the following 5 or 6 features, and then I'll elaborate on this. The first feature of theory is conceptual sensitivity. The second feature is rational structure, some kind of loose structure of reasons. The third is it's forever unearthing the background assumptions and presuppositions of our statements, and therefore our outlook on the world. Fourth is generality. A theory is never about a single particular. It's always about a number of particulars, particularly things that are disparate. It's trying to bring them together. Then one feature of modern theories, certainly, is that they are not purely speculative. They are rooted through lived experience, and they transcend lived experience. And finally is that they are all aspiring to some degree of objectivity and truth. You can't really think of a theory which is not aspiring to some degree of objectivity and truth, which is not the case with other kind of ways of thinking about the world, not necessarily true. So I'll just elaborate on this, and in order to do that, let me begin by the first proposition, namely that human beings are concept-bearing animals. Now, what do I mean by that? Unlike, say, we are not just sentient creatures. We don't just sense the world. Our sensory experience of the world is already shaped by certain concepts. Our experience is already laden with certain concepts. So, for example, I'm not just sitting at this, something, at this piece of wood. I'm sitting at, I know, and you know, because we are human beings, we know that I'm sitting at a table, and I'm a lecturer addressing fellow faculty members and students. So I can't just say that there are creatures sitting over here. That would be an inappropriate description, right? That there are some masses of physical particles sitting here, and I'm also one such part of this mass, and I am making some noises, and you are listening to these noises. I mean, listening itself is laden with something. You are receiving these noises. That's some kind of a physical description, but it's not that it's incorrect. It is. I'm not. I mean, I could be more accurate and more scientific about it. But this description, though not incorrect, is not the correct description. The correct description is that I'm not sitting at a piece of wood. I'm sitting at a table, something like a table. And I'm addressing you as a lecturer, and you're hearing me as students or as faculty members. So our roles are already laden with certain concepts. Sorry, we are not just, we're persons, and we're persons with certain roles. I'm performing that role, and you two are performing the same role. This is not just a piece of, as I said, this is not just a piece of wood, it's a table. And I already have a grasp of what is done with a table, what a table is. The materiality of the table is not as important as its function. We know that a table is something that we don't sit on the table, we sit at the table, and we use the table in order to talk, or in order to eat, in order to discuss something, and so on. Right? It's something that we've taken for granted. This is a world which we already understand conceptually. It's already it's shot through with concepts. Our world is already conceptual. Animals we don't know much about animals, really. I mean, I certainly don't. But I guess that they don't understand the world in this way. And if there were other human beings who come from a completely different culture and who did not have giving a lecture, I mean, if somebody from the ancient past or from another culture walked in here, he or she, even though he's a human being, will not understand what's going on. I mean, not any collection of people will constitute a class or an audience, and certainly not any concrete structure will become a lecture hall, right? So we already have an understanding that this is a lecture hall. There's somebody who's sitting over here is expected to give, either talk or address or to give a lecture, and so on and so forth. So that's the first important thing, that the world that we live is not just a world that we sense in a non-conceptual way. It's a world in which the world is already classified. There are already distinctions. A chair is different from a table. The person who fixed this mic is not the same as the person who's delivering the lecture. The person who's sitting over there is likely to be a listener and therefore a student, or in a classroom such as this, and so on. Okay, that's one. The second is that much of the initiation into this world, at least in the very early part of our life, is done through participation. We just learn to be in this conceptual world. We're not taught all this in a classroom, right? This is a practical understanding. It's a conceptual understanding, but it's a practical understanding. It's something which is already embedded in certain practices into which we are initiated, right? I think of a 4 or 5-year-old will know without having been taught. I mean, certainly, even a 2-year-old person will know that the woman who he is very intimate with and who takes care of her or him is his mother, likely to be his mother or his elder sister, or and so on. So this is, again, this is a role that he's not taught in any formal. There's no instruction. It just happens, and that's true. That's true of a whole variety of things in our social world, right? So much of this conceptual understanding is embedded in practices. It's a practical. It's something which is learned practically through lived experience. It is not something that is formally taught. However, as we grow up, sometimes we interrupt this flow of experience, interrupt this activity, and pause to ask some question pertaining to it. And it may just happen quite miraculously, you know. The example that comes to my mind is from my old GNU days when when there was a blackboard, I used to write with a piece of chalk. Very often the quality of chalk was so bad, it would just, as it broke as I wrote. And I used to often wonder what this is. And, what is this really chalk? Or is it something else? And that is, I was interrupting the flow of my, whatever it is that I was doing, teaching, and asking myself this question, what is it? I mean, this is something, if probably not a piece of chalk, but something else. Now, that's, in a sense, a classic philosophical question. What is something? What is it? What does it consist of? I mean, it's a scientific question as well, but normally people in the olden days used to think of it as a philosophical question. What is the nature of this world? What is the nature of this? And so on. So these ad hoc reflections, which are part of our daily life, and as we are, in a sense, forced to reflect upon the world that we are living in. And there are these, what I call, we reflect, but these reflections are not systematic, they're ad hoc. And as distinct from, supposing a systematic reflection. So supposing I made a hullabaloo about the whole, I looked at the entire box of chalk and found that the entire box was substandard, and I requested somebody to examine that box, and chalk will be, will have some systematic reflection, sustained thinking about, what the quality of the chalk that the teacher was using is, and that's different from the initial question, right? What's this? Is it really a piece of chalk? Or but here we have a report, so this is systematic reflection, and the report, which is systematic reflection, is actually word dependent. But not all systematic reflections are word dependent. There are many forms of systematic reflections that are expressed in a non-wordy, non-linguistic way. I mean, a poet could, not a poet, a musician can reflect on the world in a systematic way. I mean, we know that, in Indian classical music, we have the term khayal. And a khayal is a kind of reflection. But there's hardly any, except at the end, when you have a small bandish, it's a meditation, it's a reflection on the world. Painting doesn't use any words, but it's also a systematic reflection. If I take very often the example of Pablo Picasso's Guernica, which is a sustained reflection on the human condition and on war and the outrageous impact of war. And now, so there are all sorts of ways in which we reflect on the world without using a single word. But when we reflect on the world using words, we have what we call world-dependent systematic reflections. And then we have many, many kinds of word-dependent systematic reflections. For example, poetry is one. You can have all fiction. A novel is also a systematic reflection on the nature of society. I mean, if you look at Balzac's novels or Charles Dickens or in our own times, in our world, I mean, look at Srinal Shukla's Rag Darbari on the nature of Indian politics, and or Rahir Masum Raza's Aadha Gaon. These are kind of these are fictitious. They're not heretical in any way, but these are very important systematic reflections. So you can have word-dependent systematic reflections, but these are not theories. So what are theories? I would say that these theories are a species of word-dependent systematic reflections. They are distinct from ad hoc reflections because ad hoc reflections are not systematized, and they're different from other forms of reflective awareness of human beings because these are word dependent. They use language. But this is only a very general statement that I made. I need to now get more specific, and I mentioned 5 or 6 features in the kind of broad definition that I gave of theory. I said that a theory must be a word-dependent systematic reflection with these features. So what are these features? And the first feature that I mentioned was that it's conceptually sensitive. Unlike other forms of word-dependent systematic reflections, a theory must, it focuses, it reflects on the meaning of a word, on precise nature of the concepts that are embedded in words. How the use of one word is different from the use of another word, and how the same word is used in different ways in different contexts. So it's a meditation on words, and it focuses on concepts. So, for example, this is I better be quick, otherwise I'll spend all my time on this. Say, take for example the word freedom, right? Now, a normative moral or political theorist will take will actually could even write a treatise on freedom, right? What is freedom? In modern Western political theory, a lot of people have done this. In India too, I mean, a number of people have written on freedom. I mean, Gandhi, which is his understanding of what freedom really means. But in Western political theory, a lot of people have tried to argue that if you attend to freedom, then the structure, the conceptual structure of freedom is that it can be outlined in the following way: that someone, a human being, in this case, we are referring to human beings. So a human being is free. To be free for a human being is to be free from something in order to do something. Right? Now, freedom from something or to become free of something that you are, that from which you are freeing yourself is something which is negatively evaluated. Otherwise, you wouldn't want to be free of it. You don't want to be free from it, right? And most of the people who are writing on freedom actually refer to it as that from which you want to be free of constraints. You want to be free from constraints, right? So you cannot understand freedom without understanding, what is the nature of constraint from which can be physical, they can be legal, they can be psychological. I'm sure you understand the first two very well, but psychological constraint, I mean, supposing there has been a person who's been a slave, all his, his forefathers have been. There are no legal constraints on him. He can do what he wants and so on. And supposing a person who's always been free and this slave together are asked, I mean, they are asked, they take an exam. And one finds that a person who's been free for generations gets 80%. And a slave, the child of a slave who's just become free, he writes the exam or she writes an exam and she gets barely 40%. Now, what is the reason for that? A number of people argue that there are psychological barriers. This person is suffering from a lack of self-confidence, that years and years of slavery has bred a certain kind of self-contempt and lack of self-confidence in himself, and just not able to perform the way other people are performing. So he has to, apart from, he's become physically and legally free, but there are a lot of psychological barriers. And those psychological barriers are acting as constraints on him or her. So he's not truly free till he gets over these psychological constraints. But you can, in psychological constraints, you can talk about socioeconomic constraints, right? I mean, supposing there could be a person who's, let's talk about India, an upper caste person who's very poor, and because of his poverty, because of his poverty, he's unable to go to the examination center where he has to write the exam. So although he's physically, legally, and psychologically free to do that, he is in some ways economically handicapped. And because of those economic constraints, he's not able to take the exam and therefore truly, well, I'm already coming to the second part of the question. You're free from certain constraints in order to be or to have something. Now that is another very important component of freedom, right? To be not just whether is freedom just to be free from certain constraints to satisfy your desires, or are these desires to be evaluated, and do you need to make a distinction between what are worthy and what are unworthy desires? And you're free only if you're able to satisfy desires that you find really worthy, which you evaluate as really good for you, which really make you free in the best sense of the term. So you can see that this is already becoming a discussion, a theoretical discussion on an important topic. And this is the case not only with freedom, it's also the case with a whole variety of concepts that we use in our daily life. I mean, law is one. I mean, I'm sure you've done this a number of times. I don't have to repeat it, but the nature of law, what is law, is something that you must be studying. I mean, it's a rule or a system of rules. That is something which is pretty obvious, but there has to be some, coercive element there. It must be enforceable, otherwise it's not a law. And so this kind of meditation on, is it a command or is it something else? I mean, these kind of sort of deeper reflections on the meaning of law is something that is very much part of a theory of law, not just so yeah. The first feature, any theory, any social, political, legal theory, you'll find spends a lot of time on not just defining something, which is not which you can actually get from a dictionary, but meditating on or systematically reflecting on the meaning of freedom, the meaning of justice, the meaning of law, the meaning of the state, of civil society, of dignity or humiliation, and so on. So that's the first. The second feature of theory is that it always involves some form of reasoning. It's got a rational structure. To have a rational structure doesn't mean that it must have a deductive, a logical structure, but there are always a chain of reasons, no matter how they are presented. They could be presented in a formal way, or they could be present informally. So a lot of this a lot of these reasons are found in narratives. I mean, in novels, you can find a chain of reasons for why some things, when they actually went in the direction in which they did. Right? And you will find in that whole narrative, you will find reasons being given, and you can actually put them in a systematic form if you wish to. Although the narrator himself or herself will not do that for you, but you can actually find a discernible set of reasons and a structure of such reasons. A theory does it much more explicitly, right? It could be in a analytical philosophy form, very stated, more like deductive logic, or it may not necessarily have that form, but it will have a chain of reasons, right? I would give more. I could elaborate on this point, but I better move ahead because otherwise we will run short. We won't have enough time for discussion. The third is what did I say? It's aspiration. Let's say aspiration to truth and objectivity. So all any view that we have, any initial reflection that we have will invariably be, and we shouldn't be too worried about this, will invariably be from a certain standpoint. It will invariably be, there will be prejudgment in it. So prejudgment is the same as prejudice. It will have a prejudice. It will have some bias. It could be institutional bias, it could be class bias, it could be caste bias. I mean, the nature of our upbringing is such that we will invariably be more informed by our location by the structure, the social structure in which we are uh, born. Remember, I said that we are initiated into certain social practices, and the biases inherent in the social practices will inflect the way we look upon the world. So I don't think there is anybody who somehow gets it right, gets to an point of view, gets rid of his or her biases from the very start. We always come with certain biases. In theories, when I said the theories aspire to some degree of objectivity and truth, what I'm saying is that in our attempt, the attempt of systematic reflections of this kind, theoretical, is not just to reflect your own personal viewpoint, your subjective viewpoint, or the viewpoint of your class location, but to transcend that, to move beyond it. Now, that doesn't mean that we will be totally objective. That is impossible for human beings. We can't be totally objective. We cannot be completely free of biases. But we can aspire to it and get rid of many of those biases. And very often, the way to aspire, the way to achieve whatever degree of objectivity you achieve is through mutual encounters. And that's why this reasoning is invariably public. We make our, I mean, most of us sitting over here make our viewpoints known to others, not just to, hopefully, I mean, many people do it only to prevail upon others, but we do it not to just prevail upon others, but to our viewpoint as a proposal on the world on which we're reflecting so that we can get some response from the other, which is either disagreeing with you, which is conflicting with you, or which may actually agree with you and consolidate that viewpoint. And that is an attempt we make all the time when we are, aspiring to truth and objectivity. Okay, so that is the third. I mean, a novel does it. Opinion pieces in newspapers don't even attempt to do that. They're subjective views. They may actually be objective in the sense that a lot of people may agree with them and they may achieve a certain degree of intersubjectivity. They may actually achieve a degree of truth, but that is not the intention of an opinion piece, right? An editorial, on the other hand, tries to be different. But again, editorial also is limited. But when we are doing human sciences, we are actually trying to move beyond subjective opinion pieces. News reporting has that element of, at least, but not in our times. In our times, they're pretty unabashedly biased. I mean, everybody's news is passing a subjective view, which is power-laden and interest-laden, is passing off as truth, and which is the other power, view. My view must prevail over everybody. Everybody must agree, go back to what my view is. But social scientists and social theorists hope that is not what they're doing. Whether they're successful is a different issue. But that is one feature of social and human theory of the human sciences. Fourth is an explicit awareness of background presuppositions. No matter, every explicit statement presupposes a whole background of implicit assumptions. To take a very simple example, we all assume that we won't fly off. uh, we come into the room and we sit down and I it's assumed that the keep we will remain where we are, and we won't suddenly be freed from the laws of gravity and start flying off. I assume that if I'm speaking into the mic, I'm addressing people who are behind the mic, in front of me, and I'm not addressing people who are behind me, right? That is an assumption that we make. But none of these assumptions, none of this thing is made, all of this remains tacit. We don't make it explicit. We don't foreground it. A social theorist, many social theorists wish to make explicit what is implicit, because they are hoping to be deeply self-aware, and part of this deep self-awareness is to have conscious, not only more reflective, but also more explicit. We live in a world which is inarticulate, and we try to make it as human narrators, and if we do theory, we try to make this inarticulate world articulate and make something which is implicit explicit. So this is, I would say, yet another feature of not only the human sciences, but of the theories which are generated within the human sciences. There are many things that we are not fully aware of when we begin our inquiry. And even as we go through this process, there are lots of things which would remain hidden from view. They will not be available to our senses. In other words, empirical inquiry will not be sufficient. It'll only make visible what can be visible. But to make something visible that can never really become visible is also an attempt of social and political theory. To make the implicit come alive. I mentioned, for example, gravity. Gravity is not something that you can make visible, right? It's some theorist who actually demonstrated that we're all subject to laws of gravity, right? And he who invented this theory was actually empirically proven to be right. Even Einstein's theory of relativity is not open to empirical, it's not visible to people, but it doesn't contradict experience. In some ways, it presupposes it. Experience presupposes it. The famous German philosopher, Immanuel Kant, talked about how all our experience presupposes, say, the category, certain categories. And two of the categories that he said were indispensable for any experience to take place at all were time and space. We all experience things in space as spatially related to one another, and we all experience things in time as being in a flow, as if something was before and something was after. These categories are presupposed by experience. They're not available in experience, but they're presupposed by experience. And the task of a theorist such as Kant, who is an epistemological theorist, the task of theorists such as Kant was to demonstrate that our experience presupposes these categories. We all talked about other categories as well, but this is one of the tasks of of theorists to. So therefore, theory cannot just be reduced to an empirical inquiry. And I come to, related to the last one of the points, I think maybe the last point, but the one before that, it is our theories don't contradict experience. They are in some ways shot through with experience, but they are not reducible to our experience. So even our social and political and legal experience, theories, our legal, social, and political theories cannot be reduced to our experience of the social, political, institutional, legal world. They must be, these theories must generate views which in some ways transcend experience. I think I mentioned one other feature, but I can't, I don't seem to remember. What was it? Generality, yes, last point. So, if I have, I cannot have a theory of one thing. Normally, theories are of not only multiple things, but of multiple things that are pretty different from one another. What a theory helps us do is to organize it in such a way that we are able to subsume them under a general category. So some degree of generality is part and parcel of a theory. Now, this general need not be universal. As I mentioned, there are very few things which are human, which are universal, which are found at all places and at all times. There are some, but that would be a very minimal description. It will not be a thick description, and it will not be a very useful description for most people. Do generality, this kind of so although generality is a feature of theory, universality is a feature of only very few theories. And yet, if I make a statement about one thing, that doesn't constitute a theory. So some degree of generality, some degree of context independence is a part and parcel of theory. Okay, so let me just sum it all up. I think, yeah, this particular talk has been a bit abstract. I promised that the other talks will not be so abstract, but I hope that my job today was to explain to you what theory is. I also meant to talk about why we need it, but I shall leave it to our discussion. But let me just sum it up. I've said that a theory is a form of systematic reflection. The reason why I say that is because in our life, in the world in which we live, as we experience it, as we practice it, we disrupt our practices by by short-term reflections. But those ad hoc short-term reflections are not systematic, and therefore they're not theoretical. That's ruled out completely. So systematic reflection is one feature. But I said that humans express themselves in a number of ways. Expressing through, there are many languages. Music is also a language, but there is word-dependent expression or word-dependent reflection. And there's no theory if you are playing a flute, right? That's a very important aspect of human life, of human experience, of human existence, of a refined human existence. But when you're playing a flute, you're not doing theory. It has to be done through language. It has to be done through words. So a systematic word-dependent reflection is a theory, but not all systematic word-dependent reflections are theories, right? An essay, a report, a poem, all of this depends on how words are arranged and how they may describe something, they may even meditate on some things, but I wouldn't call them theory. So a systematic word-dependent reflection must have some features, and I then listed 6 features, which I won't repeat. And once you have at least 4 or 5 of those features, you are doing theory, you're producing theory, you're generating theory. Otherwise, you're not. So it is a specialized activity. Unlike reflection, everybody reflects all the time. A lot of us systematically reflect all the time, and I don't think our life is possible without some systematic reflection. We may not do original systematic reflections. That's something that we all do. But we learn. We do learn how to, we can learn, and many people also learn not just to have a philosophy or a theory from someone, but to do it ourselves. And what I try to do is to give a brief description of the features or what it is that we're doing when we're doing theory. Right? I'll stop. We can group certain questions which are related. But if there are independent, if the second question is quite different from the first, then I'll answer the first.
Hello, hello, am I audible? Thank you for coming over here, Rajeev sir, and giving out this presentation. Also, big fan of some of your works, which I read for my political science one. So first years, pay attention. Anyway, sir, vis-a-vis what you told about how theory requires an a structure in sense of words, and you laid down a different how theory is effectuated, how you express it. Question which in my mind is, what's the role of language extends in the development of the said ideas behind a particular theory? So, for example, if there exists languages out there and which they do which lack words for certain meanings, they are limited in number of colors. For example, you don't have a word for a color, it's not imaginable for you to describe it or define it. So how does language, because what I got from the lecture was that words and how you express them, how you incorporate them, how do you manage them, play a very critical role in the expression of or development of a theory. So in that instance, how would a language play out, what role a language plays, and if there are words missing in the said language for certain ideas to be developed, so will those ideas play out?
Yeah. So I think, okay, let me see if there is a second question which is related to this.
Hi, sir. First of all, it's a pleasure to be in your audience. My question is that when we're trying to unearth our biases in the process of reflection, isn't this process sort of autological in the sense that we could end up spiraling and seeing where the bias comes from? As Saksham rightly pointed out, the language that we use will inherently have some biases that would then be rooted in other biases. And I suppose we could end up in a spiral of figuring out where to stop. So when we're theorizing, where do we stop?
Right. So, okay, let me just say, instead of talking about a missing color, you don't have a word for a certain color, and therefore, quite likely, you will not see the world as having that color. I mean, there are so many, I think that was probably wrong. You know what I just said. I want to revise my view. I know a lot of painters who recognize very subtle variations in blue, even though they do not have the word for those many shades of blue. So I guess, but they do. So yeah, I mean the working with many shades of blue over a long period of time will make the painter recognize the difference between one shade and another shade, which many of us who are not so trained will fail to recognize, right? So I think painting is a word-independent activity. Words can shape. I mean, through words, we can sometimes make a distinction between one shade and another. It can help, but it can happen even without words. So I think that is not a very good example. But let me give you two examples where words make a huge difference to our experience. The distinction between anger and indignation, right? If a person lacks the vocabulary, if he doesn't understand the meaning of the word indignation, then he's missing out on a very important difference between mere anger and being indignant. Because indignation always presupposes that there is a recognition that some injustice has been done. And you're indignant at that injustice. Now, you could be wrong about it. You could be mistaken that there is, when you may see injustice somewhere where there is no injustice. And you may not recognize some injustice when there is injustice. That is possible. But in order to make a distinction between merely being angry at something and being indignant, you must understand the whole idea of justice. And unless you understand that through language, word-dependent language, you will not experience the difference. Or take, for example, and this is something which all of you must have experienced, infatuation and love. Very big difference between the two, right? Now, all of us get infatuated, and we mistake that for love. But in fact, after some more experience and after some better understanding, and we recognize the difference. Perhaps years go by and then you recognize that you're not really, you didn't really understand that. So I think you understand the difference between the two only as you reflect on the meaning of these two. Your emotions themselves are shaped by that, and you can recognize that you were mistaken earlier when you mistook infatuation for love, right? The different forms of love. Again, that's the subtle differences between different forms of love depend upon language. Many languages have that distinction. They do have words. Doesn't mean that the concept is not there, right? So this I'm going to, in my subsequent lectures, the word secular was introduced in the Constitution only in 1976. So one could, but from that it doesn't follow that the Indian Constitution was not secular before 1976. Nothing very much changed after the word secular was introduced in the Constitution, as far as the Constitution is concerned. Good or bad, something changed. And we started to look at the Constitution slightly differently. But it was still, even when the word was absent, the Constitution, the word secular is all over the the articles of the Indian Constitution, even when the word was not used. Sometimes I honestly feel that we should have left. Oops. Yeah. Sometimes I feel that we should probably have left the Constitution without secular in it. Our problem started with the introduction of the word secular. I think the Constitution was good enough as it was, because it was a secular Constitution already. No need to have introduced the word. There are other times when I actually feel that it was probably better to have made it explicit, but then we have to, and this is the task which people like myself have undertaken, the word secular in the Constitution, to explain what it actually means by reading the Constitution, because there's so many different ways in which the word secular is used. There are so many different meanings of the term secular. There are different regions, different countries, different nation states that have used the word secular in so many different ways. So we ought to understand how we do and should read the word secular as an integral feature of the Constitution. Anyway, I'll talk about that. Your question was about, it was language. It was, what was it once again? I think I'll take one by one, otherwise I'd forget. I think brevity is not my strength. I don't answer the question in one sentence. I take a long time, and by the time I finish talking about one, I forget the second question. Ambuli.
It was just about how we can, or whether we can stop a spiral
Right.
of identifying biases.
Right. Ultimately, it's a pragmatic decision. You can never stop. Even when you, reasons, that's a different example. If you give a chain of reasons, there's always a reason for the reason that you've given. And it's an endless, but at once, at one stage in that context, for that time, you feel that this would suffice. There is no need to go further or deeper, at least for the moment. And that's the way you stop. It's others can always come up to you and say, well, that's not the point at which you stop. And then you have to respond by saying, well, look, I've already given so many, answers. And why are you asking me why are you not satisfied with it? Why do you think this is not sufficient? And if that person is unable to come with a satisfactory answer to your counter question, then I suppose both of you agree that this is sufficient. But sufficient is not complete. There's always an incompleteness. That's in the nature of the human condition. We have to accept that we will never, that's the difference between that's how we imagine God to be. Limitless, right? But unlike that entity, real or unreal, unlike that entity that we imagine or we discover, I leave it to people, and I'm agnostic on that issue. We are limitless, or we are limited, we are finite, and therefore we will always leave things not because we have completed them fully, but because beyond the point we can't go any further. We have to accept our limits. And as long as people around us are reasonably satisfied, that should be sufficient. That's my answer. I honestly feel that. Does it satisfy you? Is it sufficient?
It just feels like you're making a somewhat modest claim of having the best possible way of viewing something from within that something.
I think there in rational choice in economics in particular, there was an idea of a maximization, and then somebody came up with the idea of what is this? Sufficing. Optimal, or it was Henry Simon or Harry Simon. I can't remember the name of the guy. I did economics 50 years, 60 years ago. I can't remember. But, there is something called satisficing. Some word, I can't remember the word, sufficing. We cannot maximize everything. It's impossible. Good enough is good enough. We have to leave it to future generations to unravel some things. We can't do everything. I mentioned that a lot of things remain implicit. And one of the reasons why they remain implicit is because we cannot make everything explicit. Language itself is so much bigger and larger than we are. We think that we use language, that language is an instrument and a tool, but actually it's language which is using us. We are its instruments. And language is a web which is far larger than anything that human beings can imagine. It's first of all, it's been there for a period that we cannot even imagine. I mean, we invented language as a human species long, long ago, and it's been around with us. And it'll be around for an infinite generation if the planet doesn't end. And if we all don't die, it'll be around with us for a long time. And we've got to, this is it's a galaxy of words. We're nothing compared to it. And to imagine that we can actually write it all up and I don't believe that we can ever find the perfect syntax, the perfect structure. I mean, I don't think so. I think language itself is one of those big oceans. And if that is the case, then we will never be able to find full, complete answers. But a good enough answer should be.
So we have a question from the person who joined online. So
Ah.
it's in the
Oh,
chat box.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's by Mr. Prabhash Ranjan. So he's asking, is it possible to generalize social theory in a
Hmm.
democratic way, not by any force, because everyone has a different lived experience, different values, and a unique way of life? Then how can we generalize it?
The only way to generalize it is by mutual encounters. Uh, I mean, can is different. There was a time, but the inadequacy of the theory will show up. Today, it may by diktat, but someone will come up tomorrow and show its weakness, its untruth, its deficiency. So I think objectivity and truth are features of a theory that grow, that develop, and they develop through mutual encounters in the public domain, uh, and through mutual critical scrutiny. So even differences, I mean, you talked about democratically. So yeah, I mean, it is something which will develop democratically in the sense that it will always happen through deliberation and negotiation of differences. We will generate a common view, which is the objective view, but it is not something that is given to us. We begin with a commonality which has been given to us from the past, but that commonality is amidst and always surrounded by huge number of differences and disagreements which are yet to be resolved and overcome. And again, it's through encounter, mutual inquiry, mutual encounter, conversation, mutual deliberation, that we will arrive at a new commonality. And as I said, I mean, this is not a process that will ever be completed. I mean, maybe on certain things we can arrive at something which is common, and maybe we can have the truth about certain things, which is not just temporary and ephemeral, but something which will last and which is corroborated again and again by the wise people of different generations, so that it becomes like, a human truth. And I do think that there are some truths like that. But there are always, there will always be differences, even about the so-called ultimate truth. We'll have to live with this. We'll have to accommodate these differences and live with them, and not hope that our view will forcibly prevail on the other. So, yeah.
So we can take one more question if we have.
There is.
Good evening, sir. I'm Utkarsh. So I'll go back to the question which someone asked from behind about words. So according to you, it's a necessary condition but not compulsory. Is it? So let's just say
For what?
to build a theory. Like it's one of the necessary
Yes.
conditions, but not compulsory.
No, it's necessary and compulsory, but not sufficient.
Okay. Oh, sorry, sir.
Yeah.
So when we talk about how universal a theory is, so how big of a role language plays, and if it's about language and words, so let's just say if someone knows more languages, so he can like so there are studies going on in cognitive sciences ki how languages boost someone's IQ. So if someone, let's just say, I cannot relate with, it's someone from other place and has, or their vocabulary is much more than mine. So when I go and read their literature to understand, so I won't, my theory would be like, will be full of biases and interpretation, because I won't be able to tell what he was trying to say, and I will misinterpret it, and the theory which will come, which won't have that universal factor which I'm trying to build. And if I try to build it, so how can we manage that? So words do play a role there or not?
I'm not 100% certain that I understand. I mean, I understand parts of what you said, but not the whole. But let me attempt to answer. First of all, I'm not very comfortable with the term universal. And as I said, one can try for, there are some things about which you can have a universal theory when it comes to human beings. I'm not talking about, laws of gravity and so on. Those are pretty universal, but even they have limits, right? But when it comes to human beings, there are very few universals. There are, but very few. So that's one. Languages, of course, it's good to, I mean, there are limits to how many languages you can learn. If you're talking about language in the very the commonsensical understanding of the word or language, Hindi is a language, Telugu is a language, French is a language, right? Now, if you happen to be a French speaker and a Telugu speaker and an English speaker and a Hindi speaker, and if you understand these languages very well, you're actually taking part in. If you just understand these four languages, you're participating in four different worlds. Each language generates a world. There are some common things, but some things which are unique to each language. And that's a perspective that you're learning, provided you learn the language correctly and at a certain degree of depth. You're learning you're learning to live in a world. It's not just learning the words of a language, but you're actually learning the skill of living that world, which you would not have. We don't live the world of the French simply by using some of that vocabulary. We're probably mistranslating that vocabulary anyway. To understand the nuances of the way many words are used by the French, you have to actually live with the French. So, I mean, it's not an easy task. Using multiple languages is not the same as, living those languages. And I think all of us have limited, capacities to live in those multiple worlds. I mean, there are a finite number of words which we can live as deeply. Most people, therefore, I think, can live at best in the worlds of two languages deeply. Not many. And therefore, if we go by our ability to produce common theories on our own, I think the chances are very little. It's, as I said, it's mutual encounter, mutual understanding, through which you learn, and it's a collective possession. It's not it's not my possession. I may learn 3-4 languages, but I will not be able to generate anything which is common on my own. I have to do it together. You know, I mean, scientists know this very well, but I think human scientists should also know. All research is really collective research. Any book you see, you'll find thousands of references, right? It's not just, you are working not only with your contemporaries, you're working with your predecessors. Every book that you read, which was written in the last century, I mean, the writer is already dead, but you're living in that world because of the words that the writer has left behind you, and because you have the ability to get into it with the help of many people. So, yeah, I mean, don't think of it in individualistic terms. This whole enterprise of mutual learning, it's very collective, and it's constant exchanges, constant encounters that will help you. And it's the, you know, it's the practical ability that you have. I mean, social sciences are pretty useless if from multiple sources, if they do not generate a feeling of compassion and empathy for people who are different from you, and if you are not able to live with them, I think क्या मतलब है उसका? I mean, this purely academic, scholastic exercise, I mean, unless it's translated into, you know, better collective living, I'm very unhappy with the state of human sciences today, because it is not effective. You know. Anyway, I think I can ramble on and on, but yeah.
And this is Kannan. I teach here. So what I understood from your talk is basically you try to really discuss theory in a more analytical sense. But I would like to know from you, when you try to discuss theory in the Marxian sense, so where they talk about theory and the praxis, one cannot be separated from the other. So can you really attribute the same kind of a qualities, the one which you attributed analytically? Will that assume when you discuss the theory praxis kind of a continuum? And that's what I understand.
Yeah.
So will it have the same kind of a quality? Will it have the same kind of thing, or it will change? And so I basically feel that the way you try to describe analytically might get completely ruptured when you try to discuss that in relation with the praxis.
Yeah.
So in that context, how do you really account for your kind of analytical scheme?
Yeah. So I think you use the word rupture, so I'll continue to use it. Reflection is a rupture. I mentioned a number of times that you're interrupting the flow of practice. You are disrupting it. The moment I'm writing with a piece of chalk and suddenly I stop writing and I start to wonder, what the hell, what's going on here? What is the nature of this? So the moment you start reflecting, you're already interrupting. And we have to keep interrupting this in order to refine our practice and in order to grow. I mean, let me complete. So there is a fundamental difference between reflection and practice, and systematic reflections and practice, and theory and practice. There is no. Now we can bridge after having generated that rupture, we can kind of rejoin them. And how to rejoin them? So how theory can once again inform practice, that's the job that we need to do. So to use the Marx's own words, how can theory become a material force? But that is a very big job. You have to fine tune, you have to you have to generate a new practice informed by their theory. And then through a dialectic. And as you know, dialectic does mean this rupture. So I think it's a work of a long series of mediations, the rejoining of theory and practice. And no wonder a lot of theorists fail. A lot of practitioners also fail. They fail to realize what their theory teaches them. And a lot of theorists remained only speculative guys and who don't, because this is a whole art that very few people have learned. How many people actually live what they theorize, what they preach? By the way, I didn't talk about there are many different kinds of theories. So I think Marxism is basically, largely as a theory, it is an explanatory theory. It explains, and it does it pretty well in its own way up to a point. It has never generated a normative theory. There are only pure words. There is no normative theory in Marxism. And so there are good things that Marx has said about material force and this and that, but how to accomplish it, how to do it, that was a question that was raised by Lenin, but what is to be done? But I don't think he had a satisfactory answer. In fact, the solution that he devised was a total failure. We didn't have socialism or communism, we had a dictatorship. And a dictatorship that ruined the lives of a large number of people in the former Soviet Union. It was a disaster. Why? All lovely theories, but untranslatable into practice. So there was a huge divergence between what you did and what you theorized. So first of all, only an explanatory theory, Marx, and not taking normative theory seriously. And if there are good normative theorists, they also have to figure out artful ways of bridging the gap between normative theory and practice. And I don't think we've done that. Very few people have been able to do that. And it shows in the way our world is arranged today, where all the good ideas we have, what a mess we have been generating in the last 200 years. We may have very good technology, but have we been able to produce good human beings? I doubt it. So we don't even have good institutions. It's a collective thing, but most of our institutions are rotting. And in fact, it's not just India. I think a large number of institutions are rotting in many parts of the world. My view on modernity is basically changed quite a bit in the last 10, 15 years. I'm no longer such a kind of, I think we've had to re-examine our past in a very different way and learn from it in a very different way, not relegated to all the past as something which is rubbish and something which we've moved beyond. We've made progress. I don't think so. That is going a little away from the question that you raised, but I think in one complicated way, it is connected to it.
That is the case. How do you really understand the Marxian notion of distributive justice? You say that it is not resulting.
Marxists did not have a notion of distributive justice.
No. See, I'm saying.
No, no,
Marxism
Marx.
means, I'm just saying, not merely Marx.
Huh.
Just to
Oh,
take later
Marxism. Yeah.
That's what
Well, I mean, so there are all sorts of, I mean, so distributive justice is a very important idea, but, and a lot of people have done some good work, both Marxists and non-Marxists. And many of the people who worked on distributive justice have had to rearrange their view of Marx in order to get their grip on what distributive justice means. And a number of them are, I don't want to label them, let's not call them social democrats. I really don't know. I think we need to have a proper a course of action which will give us distributive justice. Alas, I mean, look at all the attempts. We are living in one of the worst times, most inegalitarian times. What fantastic progress we've made in the last 50 years. From a time when we could imagine a good redistributive program, today we are living in a world which is full of deep inequalities. Where have all our theories gone? Where have all the normative practices gone? What have the political parties done? We've misunderstood everything in order to arrive at where we are today. It's an obnoxious world in which we are living. We know that. Any Marxist would know that. And he should be glaring, or she should be glaring at the failures of both the theory and the practice. It's shameful what has happened. Not just global inequalities. I mean, in society, I mean, look at what, I mean, I don't have to talk about the wedding to make home that point. But I mean, where is the Marxist analysis of all that? There isn't. So this is not to, I mean, I'm no one. I mean, I'm a very small fry in this whole thing. This is a subjective view which I'm giving, and it's a self-critical view that I'm giving. But I mean, it's all words. Nothing is informed practice. Our practices are obnoxious. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, I strongly disagree with your position. That's okay.
oh, good. I mean, that is the reason for further encounters and deliberation and arriving at some possible commonality at some point of time. But that's good. It's a good point to. I mean, I don't want to end this, but I mean, I'd love to know more about the nature of our disagreement. And maybe one or two words will be nice even now, but if not now, maybe tomorrow or after we walk out.
So with this, we would like to have a pause. We would reconvene tomorrow, and I would thank the people who have came all the way down from Hyderabad Central University to attend this talk, and thanks to all the faculty members and the students who have taken their time out. And we would be meeting tomorrow. Thank you. And of course, we thank our speaker, Professor
And I
Bhargava.
accept your thanks.